Hi, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to Evoke Therapy Program's broadcast. I'm Dr. Brad Reedy. Today is Tuesday, January 30th, 2024. I'm very excited about tonight's topic. We're going to be talking about shadow work. What is the shadow? What purpose does it serve in our psyche and our soul? And also, what's the work? What does the work look like? How do we do the work to uncover this really powerful, important material that is lodged, kind of pressed down inside of us? So I'm excited to do that. Before I get into tonight's topic, I want to do my discussion about what's upcoming. If you've been to Finding You and you know what that's like, and you want a reconnection to yourself, we have an offering called Returning to You. I'm going to be running the next one. It'll be March 6th through 10th. We expect this one to fill up. We still have a couple of spots left, but I just want to remind you of its availability. We do this once or twice a year. So this is your opportunity to come back and to add on to the work that you've already done. I want to read this. I wrote something in the Journey of the Heroic Parent. I talked about this process of coming back, of returning to, in the context of continuing to do the work, continuing to do the therapy. And here's what I wrote. I wrote, through this process of going back, I found myself again each week. It's very difficult to find yourself until you are found by someone else first, my therapist told me. The root of the self is almost always found through another person. When someone else finds us, we come to find ourselves. And this next thought that I shared, although it's about parenting, I don't want you to get distracted by it. In fact, you'll notice in my writing or speaking, I often use the term other, which is a very common thing for some therapists to use in their writing. And what it does is it speaks to the universality of the other person. It could be a spouse, it could be a child, it could be a friend, could be a colleague, could be a boss, could be an employee. It really is about our relationship with other people as defined or dictated by the relationship we have with ourselves. So I went on to write in the book, Parenting from the Inside Out. Daniel Siegel and Mary Hartzell cite new research on the brain as well as parenting studies to explain how greater self awareness in parents can lead to healthier attachments and healthier developments in children. They wrote, research in the field of child development has demonstrated that a child's security of attachment to parents is strongly connected to the parent's understanding of their own early life experiences. As a parent, making sense of your life is important because it supports your ability to provide emotionally connecting and flexible relationships with your children. So if you're thinking about Finding You for the first time, we have one of those coming up, of course, in February, or you're thinking about coming back, Returning to You is that offering. It's a chance to reconnect, to refine yourself. And from that base, everything else falls into place. I'll be talking more about that tonight. So let's talk about the shadow. First of all, I'm borrowing a lot of concepts from where I was introduced to the idea of the shadow from the book Meeting the Shadow, The Hidden Power of the Dark Side of Human Nature. This is a conglomeration of essays from various authors. Some are therapists, some are artists, some are writers in the broader field, and talk about this idea of the shadow in many different aspects. It was edited by Connie Zweig and Jeremiah Abrams. So that's a big piece of where my start in this work came from. There are other writers, of course. There are lots of. I've listed mine in order of kind of the level of importance. Most of these are Jungian therapists, those who follow the teachings of Carl Jung, but some, of course, fall just outside of that, but of course make a lot of sense in the context of understanding the shadow and Carl Jung's work. Of course, Carl Jung's books, J.D. Gill, James Hollis. I love James Hollis. Richard Rohr. I love Richard Rohr because he's a Catholic. He's part of the Catholic clergy, and so I think for a lot of people who are belong to a religion, there's a way of understanding this kind of psychology, this kind of depth psychology, and still maintaining your faith in your faith practice. So Richard Rohr is a wonderful author. Robert A. Johnson also is a wonderful psychoanalyst that writes well. Connie Zweig, of course, has written more books on the shadow. Mary Louise von Franz is a fantastic writer and who understands and spoke about the shadow quite a bit. James Hillman, and of course, Joseph Campbell, one of my personal heroes. And he and Carl Jung are kind of siblings in this work. They can, you can read them both in reference to the other, and they complement each other's work. So let me just explain what the shadow is when we talk about the shadow. But I have to start off with some definitions first. When I talk about ego and soul, I'm talking about two primary energies, two primary parts of us. The ego is the manager inside. It's similar to what internal family systems might think of managing. The ego finds a way to manage who we are, to manage our sense of self, to manage what we allow ourselves to express, to feel, to think. If we get presented with information from other people that we don't like, the ego has these defenses, right? We rationalize, justify. We create these defenses, these kind of these walls that protect us from the threat. And soul isn't a ghost. When I talk about soul, it's really talked about in contrast to the ego and Jungian therapy. Soul is the deepest part of ourselves. It's the most knowing part of ourselves. It's You might even think of it in spiritual terms as a connection to the divine in all of us. It's the part of ourselves that is whole and complete and authentic and clear and wise and comfortable with ambiguity and uncertainty. It is the richest part of ourselves, the totality of all the rich parts of ourselves. So ego is an energy that defends us and protects us and manages things, manages our impulses and our urges against what the culture, the context says is good and bad, right? It kind of manages between those two forces and energies. And soul is the deeper part of ourself. So I just want to clarify that in case there's misunderstanding. So let's talk about the defense. What is the defense protecting? What's happening there and why does it do it? First of all, the defense, the ego, protects us from feelings of being bad, of being wrong, essentially being worthy of love and connection. If we get presented with information about ourselves that at some conscious or unconscious level we think would disqualify us from connection, from love, from the attention and affection of others, the ego stands guard and says that information shall not pass. That information is untrue. This is why it's untrue. I love this idea that when you think about defensiveness is experienced. The way that we experience most of the time is this thought that we have that you don't quite understand me. You don't understand the intentions of my heart. You don't understand what I was trying to do or the good in me, my best efforts. So ego is that force that comes in and protects us against threatening ideas, thoughts, images, beliefs about ourselves that others try to feed back to us. So that's what the ego is. Now, why does it do it? Essentially, it does it for two basic purposes. Number one, if we are alienated from our caregivers and from others later on in life, we find it really difficult to survive. We are sapiens are a group animal, right? We don't fare well on our own. And you could argue to say virtually everybody listening to this broadcast is dependent upon thousands, millions, maybe even billions of other people. All the technology that allows you and I to communicate in this way, that comes from a lot of people. It comes from the people who built upon basic history. So we need other people to survive. We need the tools, we need the connection, we need the protection of the pack, if you will, of the tribe. So the ego makes sure that we survive, right? Make sure that we shape up and fit in so we don't get kicked out of the group, and in that lonely cast off space we don't suffer and die. But it protects against meaning, right? If I don't have a deep sense of connection, this is something again that's inherent in human beings. If I don't have this sense of understanding of meaning, I at best will fail to thrive in this life. So the ego gives us purpose early on. It gives us direction. It tells us what to do, where to go. Ego is the part of us that asks the question to others, what should I do? Soul asks the question, what do I need? Ego asks the question, what do I do? Soul asks the question, who am I? And that was the basic transition that I talked about in the journey of the heroic parent, that ultimately the question that I get most often from parents or from couples is, what do I say? What do I do? What's the best response? But I can't answer that question. And I'm not answering it because I have some merit to a technique of not answering questions. I'm not answering because it doesn't make sense. It's not the thing. I could tell you what to do, But if it's not in alignment with what you feel, what you need, what essentially works for you, it won't matter. You won't get behind it. It won't be coming from you. It'll be coming from me, and you'll immediately or eventually you'll cast it off and get rid of it. So ego and defense are what protect us from physical and spiritual threats. We talk about this idea of an ego death. I think this is, in essence, a lot of what I'll be talking about tonight. Ego death is those moments, those incidences, those failures, those humiliations that we experience in our life that ask us to let go of ego. I can give you simple examples where I've had to face this ego death recently outside of the context of parenting. I was sharing with my therapist some time ago. I'm showing those that are watching on video. I have hearing aids. You can see them if I expose them from the front. They're usually pretty invisible. And as I was grappling with my declining hearing in my family and the complaints from my family, I simply complained one day in therapy that I said to my therapist, you're lucky you have long hair so it covers up your hearing aids. And she just said in the very gentle way, remember, this is 25 years of relationship. She just kind of lovingly said, it's okay. So what? And that was an easy ego death. I immediately thought, it's okay. Who cares what people think of me? I'm going to get the hearing aids. People are going to see them. I show them to people all the time as sort of a practice, a ritual to let go of that part of my ego where I need to look a certain way. When I downsized houses, we just recently moved. If you've watched the broadcast for a long time, you'll recognize the differences in my background. Sorry for the dog barking in the background. There was an identity that I had with my previous house, with my neighborhood, with the zip code, if you will. And again, I was in therapy talking about this struggle between what I thought was the best path forward for my family and this holding on to this image, right? This, as Jung would say, that this God that I was worshiping, this house and what it represented, what it told the world about me. And when I was grappling with and confessing this to my therapist, she said lovingly, so I guess that's just where you're at right now. And just that idea, just that acknowledgement, just that witness reminding me it's okay. I am not my house. I'm not my car. I'm not my bank account, right? Those are in this country, the kind of male ego identifiers. Whereas for females, a lot of time, and this can cross genders and so forth, but it's oftentimes for mothers, it's this, my children are my report card. I'm identified with my children's struggles, with their successes. So part of this work asks us to kill, to die over and over again, to let go of our identity with false gods, if you will, with these symbols, these tokens that don't represent who we really are in our soul. And it takes work and it's exhausting. And the minute you get past one of them, there's another one right in front of you, right? The process of killing off the ego is a lifelong process. I wanted to give you some of that background before we start to talk about the shadow. So now what is the shadow? The shadow is the unconscious part of us where we have, if you can imagine this in this metaphor, stored and repressed, split off the parts of us that we were taught were unacceptable. They were either exhausting, disgusting, upsetting, anxious, triggering, something in our context, starting with our parents, suggested to us that these parts of ourselves were unacceptable. And that if we continued to embody these parts of ourselves, that we would eventually exhaust the goodwill of our caretakers, our parents, and eventually our peers and teachers in society, and we would be cast off into outer darkness alone again. So the shadow is that part of ourself that kind of Robert Bly in the book that I mentioned earlier talks about it in terms of a bag, that we put everything into the bag, that our society, our culture, our context finds unacceptable. And then in there, in that dark bag, in that closet, in that unconscious part of ourselves, those energies start making noise eventually. They start acting out. They start looking for sunlight. looking for food to feed them. See, they weren't inherently evil at all. They were just parts of us that we were told that we should hide from the world. And so they start to manifest themselves in addiction, in symptoms, in the way, in our patterns of life with our partners, with our children, with the people around us. And the journey of the heroic parent, not the book, but the actual idea of the journey of the heroic parent, is being willing to confront the parts of ourselves that we were taught we were taught to be afraid of, that we were taught was evil. And because sometimes in that bag or that unconscious part of us, those energies tend to mutate and come out in distorted ways, right? They look and sound evil. They look like maybe we're just inherently evil. Maybe people are inherently evil, when in fact, it was just the parts of our little child that our family of origin and later on the culture around us told us was unacceptable. It was about them. It was about their limitation. It was about their unknown parts of themselves. If you weren't allowed to express anger in your family, anger goes into the bag, right? If you weren't allowed to think or feel a certain thought about boys or girls, that went into the bag. And then in the bag, it can, underneath the bed, if you will, the fears become monsters. That's what that metaphor is about. The fears that we have about ourselves become monsters. They become nightmares, both sleeping nightmares and waking nightmares. Carl Jung said the first half of life is devoted to the forming of a healthy ego. The second half is going inward and letting go of it. So this work, this call that I believe everybody that participates in our program, whether it's for a marriage or for parenting or just for something that's going on at the stage of life that they're at, this call is to go inward and to confront what was discarded, to confront what you were told to be afraid of. And there are beautiful, wonderful things that happen when you go inward and claim it. But it is frightening. You have been conditioned. You've been indoctrinated into this idea that going in there will serve nobody's good, that it's a horrible, scary, frightening place. I've shared this before. This is actually a tattoo that I have on my left shoulder. For those of you that are listening to the podcast, you can go to our YouTube channel and look at these images, or you can request the slides at any time by emailing webinar@evoketherapy.com. But I have to use visuals to kind of explain this idea. This image was an image that was drawn by Joseph Campbell, borrowing from Plato and from Jung and from others to diagram what a self is, what a person is like. And what he did was he drew this circle, this round circle, borrowing from the idea from Plato originally, and depicting the person as a round circle. This is our whole self. This is our soul. This is who we are. This is us in completeness. And he said there's a line somewhere around 2/3 up the way up the circle. And that line represents the border between the conscious and the unconscious. Okay? So it's a circle. 1/3 of it approximately is conscious, and the vast majority of it, maybe more than 2/3, are unconscious. Within that conscious part of us is the ego. What I think about myself, what I think about the world. Like I said, the manager, the one that makes sense, that makes daily decisions. The one, in my case, that identifies with not having hearing loss or having a bigger house. And we think that that's who we are. And one of the reasons why so many of the therapies today struggle, I think, to really do the work of the soul is because they only take into account this top part, this conscious part. They try to mitigate symptomology, to reduce symptomology, because symptomology is causing us and those around us some suffering. But what Jung and the shadow folks know is that suffering that is being caused is trying to pull us into greater awareness. It's trying to ask us to look at something that we have discarded, some part of ourself that is underdeveloped. And what Joseph Campbell does is he draws a circle, dead center of this larger circle. And he says, this is the center of who you are. This is who you are. But that part is deep in the unconscious. So the idea of this drawing is that we make the conscious unconscious. That really is the work. Making the conscious unconscious. Everything else will fall into place after that. That is what I meant in the journey of the rogue parent when I said I was asking the wrong question. I was asking, what should I do? I was asking myself it, not anyone else particularly. I thought other people might give me ideas or suggestions that would help me discover what I should do. But I realized that that wasn't the question. The real question is, who am I? And the fact of the matter is, this is really important for all of us, no matter what context you're thinking of. The unconscious is the one fueling most of our behaviors. Doesn't matter if it's around the dinner table or it's around the boardroom table. The unconscious is what's at play. And what children who are struggling do for us, or what a marriage that's struggling does for us, is it asks us to look at those energies. But we have been taught to fear and hate those parts of ourselves. So we're resistant to the whole process. But I think of this idea that to make the conscious unconscious is a very simple way to talk about it. I wrote this just yesterday, shared it on social media. I wrote, become conscious. Everything else will fall into place. But to become conscious, first, you must learn to love and accept the parts of you that people in your history found unacceptable. That's the most difficult part of this. And how do you do that? How do you learn to love and accept the parts of you that people in your history found unacceptable? Well, you spend time around a capable, empathic, patient, non-judgmental other who, when you share something, that famous phrase that I love in psychotherapy, when a client says to me, I know I shouldn't be saying this, but I know I shouldn't feel this way, but I know I shouldn't think this, but I should be grateful for my privilege, but when I hear that prelude, I know I'm about to get something very, very rich. So the work is to spend time with somebody that can look at that and say, okay, that's who you are. Have a completely different reaction than our parents, who were so concerned about our well-being and safety and our feelings that anything that threatened the serenity of our lives, they unfortunately reacted with emotional distress. So we thought something was wrong with us. Like when my little daughter, I told the story in the journey of the heroic parent when she said, I wish all of my siblings were dead. That's a pretty bold statement that I think a lot of parents, including me, often would say, no, 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 no. You don't wish your children, your siblings dead. You love your siblings. They're so nice to you. What about this? What about that? That's the typical response. I was writing the book at the time, so I was happened to be writing it that day. So when she said that, I was in the right rhythm. I was in the right vibration, right? And I said to her, wouldn't it be great if you were an only child? We could have trips like this. I was on a trip with my wife, and with her, I would write during the day, and then at night we would do things together. And I said to her, wouldn't it be wonderful if you were an only child? You would have all this time and attention. You wouldn't be competing for time and attention. Be so much that we could do together, so much time that we could spend together. And her shoulders relaxed, her face relaxed. And she said, yeah, but Emma is my best friend. Speaking of her older sister. And I love Jake too. She didn't have a lot to say about the sibling rival older than her, but she got hurt. It didn't frighten me. It didn't scare me. That's a thought that sometimes we all have. And because I didn't run away, thus suggesting to her that her feeling that way, right, exhibiting that energy was unacceptable because I was so frightened by it. And I was so frightened by it because I tried to talk her out of it. Ideally, in that moment, in that instance, in this example, she didn't need to hide that part of herself. She didn't need to reject that part of herself. So, to become conscious, we have to face the things that will frighten us. We have to face the things that we were taught to avoid. In other words, we have to look at the places for God that people told us that God was not. We have to look in those places. Let's talk about the shadow. Let me kind of describe the process. Number one, we split off the parts of ourselves that threaten our connection to others. Starting with our caregivers, eventually it was our, our siblings, our schoolmates, our teachers, the larger culture that we interacted with, the media, right? We learn to split off those parts psychologically speaking. We learn to dissociate them from us, to not own them. I am not a selfish person. I don't want my siblings to be dead. I'm a good person. Always grateful for my siblings. That's what splitting off sounds like if I were to kind of illustrate it. Number two, those unowned parts of ourselves then seek food and light by manifesting themselves through our patterns. Right? The way we react to the world is where those buried energies start to manifest themselves. These could be considered our trauma responses, our symptoms, our mental illnesses. You've heard the phrase that when you are not healed from your trauma, you will bleed on people that didn't cut. Excuse me. You will bleed on people that didn't cut you. You will lash out at somebody, even though it's not about them. It's about you and your history. You will criticize your wife, criticize your child. I remember one time my little daughter came into the living room. I had friends over. It was late on a Saturday night. We were having an adult time together. And my young daughter got out of bed and came downstairs. And I was embarrassed and humiliated and angry and frustrated, all those things. And part of that was because I grew up in a family where children were to be seen and not heard, right? Children were a burden. Children got in the way of the adult's pleasure. That's part of my shame that I carry. So when my daughter had the audacity at, what was it, 6 years old, 5 years old, to come downstairs and to interact with adults, I was mortified. And without trying not to embarrass myself, but with a anxious sense of urgency, tried to get her back into bed. And of course, my friends, they were happy to see her. Later on, a week later, one of my friends came over and said, "I'd love to spend some time with your family if we could see your daughter again. That would be great." My daughter was an entertainer. But because of my shame, I tried to put her in the proverbial, the closet, if you will, not literal, of course. So those unintegrated parts of ourselves start to act out. They start to show up in our reactions, in our anger, in our rage. That idea from Al-Anon, if it's hysterical, it's historical, is a great lens through which to consider the shadow parts of ourselves. It shows up in addiction. I tell children in the wilderness, I understand why you're so compulsively using. You want to feel and to feed yourself. Somebody with an eating disorder, same thing. You want to feed yourself. You're starving to death over here. You start to manifest it in perversions and in distortions, and it's like you're looking through a glass that is fractured, or you're looking through something underwater. It looks distorted and misshapen. These parts of ourselves, number three, these parts of ourselves that we've exiled, or aspects of ourselves, aren't inherently evil, although when repressed, their manifestation will also take on this distorted form that I'm describing: addictions, violence towards self or others, etc. Number four, these parts hold power, wisdom, and creative energy. When reclaimed, it is said that we have expanded. As I'd become in touch with parts of myself that I was told to fear, I'm a better writer, I'm a better father, right? I have more energy, I feel revitalized, I feel free, I feel liberated. It's a powerful, joyful experience to reclaim these things, but the journey to do it is absolutely terrifying. Reclaiming them can be scary, painful, disoriented, and can temporarily cause chaos in our lives. Brene Brown talks about this in her first lecture that made her famous. I've said this many times. She said this very, very quickly. She said, I was having what I called, she said, a nervous breakdown. My therapist called it a spiritual awakening. It's the same thing. A spiritual awakening and a nervous breakdown, at least in her story, but I've seen it in myself and many others, they are the same thing. It's just the lens through which you're looking at them that makes the difference. It's your perspective. I believe that your children that are struggling are, in essence, doing it early in life. They are, and they can't consciously name it. They can't articulate it. They're not even aware that it's happening, but there are parts of themselves, their symptomology that is screaming for attention and change, screaming for you, mom and dad, to do some healing, to become aware of your shadow. Because if you don't become aware of it, just like the example with my daughter coming to the dinner party, you will take it out on them. The unknown parts of yourself become a burden to your child. If you weren't allowed to feel anger in your family, especially toward your parents, and you reinforce that idea with your children, where's that anger going to go? It's going to go inward. It can look like self-harm, look like anxiety. It look like self-medicating. So the beautiful thing about this work in the shadow and taking it out of the simple morality that we often look at life with is it leads itself to compassion and non-judgment. And it's actually more effective to treat it in that context. It is the hyper moral person that causes the bigger shadow, both in themselves and in others. And number 6, but as we integrate and come to realize that there's nothing bad about those parts of us or us, we take the energy that was spent, that our ego was using to keep those repressed aspects of ourselves, we take that energy and we reallocate it toward loving other people, creativity. If I don't need to be a good person anymore, if I've had enough of an ego death or deaths that I've let go of the idea of being a good person, you get to be mad at me. You get to be frustrated. In other words, you get to be you. If I need to be good, your anger, I have to explain it to myself and to you in such a way that you're the problem. In other words, you carry my unfinished work. So your anger becomes a mental illness. Your anger becomes some kind of symptom, some kind of complex or neuroses, some at least misunderstanding or ignorance on your part, lack of vision on your part. I take what is unhealed and unresolved in me and I put it on you, and now you're carrying the baggage. And that's what intergenerational transmission of trauma looks like. It's not the big stuff, although that happens. Children that were beat can beat their children. That happens. Children that were sexually abused can abuse their children. That can happen. That does happen sometimes. But mostly what we're talking about, the bulk of what we're talking about, is this subtle, nuanced psychological development, this spiritual development. If I don't find a mirror and spend time looking at it and recognizing that I am the cause of my unhappiness, and I'm contributing to the lack of intimacy in my marriage, the lack of connection to my child, because I'm still carrying around antiquated ideas from my parents, who got it from their parents, who got it from their parents, and so on and so forth. If I don't interrupt this cycle by taking on the responsibility of my own differentiation, of my own journey, I will hand the project to my child. And children don't do well under the weight of my project, of the parent's project. I'll ask my spouse to do for me what I should be doing for myself, what I can be doing for myself. I'll hand it off to my coworkers, to friends, to my community. I'll hand it off on social media to the world. I'll find bad people to project my unhealed parts of myself onto other people. I will make the enemy out there because it can't be in here, because it can't be inside of me. Because if it's inside of me, I have been taught that if it's inside of me, I will be unworthy of love and connection, and I will be alone, and I won't survive. And if I survive, I won't thrive. That's what the shadow work. That's what the shadow is. So the work is confronting it. The work is going in. It takes time. It's slow. It takes a lifetime. I love what Alan Watts said, the Buddhist and the teacher. He said, when you find out that there was never anything in the dark side to be afraid of, nothing is left but love, but to love. That's what happens when people experience this grace. I think it's the best word. This transcendent experience of being loved in spite of their humanness. And they learn to integrate that into themselves, to identify with that grace. All you want to do is go out in the world and love more people and give it back and give people the same experience that you've had. Carl Jung said emphatically, he stated that nothing can be transformed until it is accepted. That includes our complexes, our reality, and ourselves. The way that we usually respond to our symptoms, to our problems, to our habits, to our addictions, to our mental illnesses is with hatred, with rejection, with at least consternation, because it's causing us and the people around us problems. It's why we've shifted in our adolescent program from having parents write letters in the beginning that say, here's the impact you had on everybody. We changed it from that to, here's what we see going on and we don't know how to help you, so we're going to ask for help from other people. This is what we hope for you. And while you're doing that work, I will be doing my work. And it is from that more healed, more evolved place that a parent can more effectively parent. James Hollis wrote, we were all raised to be nice, really nice. A reflexive niceness is a pathogenic loss of connection to the soul, and it is not nice. The opposite of such a reflexive niceness is called authenticity or integrity. The ideas that we all learned in childhood, there are so much of it that's wrong and nonsense. And yet we just play it out with our children. This whole work at Evoke is about challenging that, about not accepting inadequate or wrong answers to life's most important questions. To die, metaphorically speaking, over and over again. To kill the old ideas, the old concepts, the old relationships, the old notions about what it means to be a person, what the goal is in this life. So what does the work look like in terms of dealing with the shadow? We first have to ask ourselves, what is it that our soul is asking of us? What does my soul need? In a lot of ways, the way that folks who talk about the shadow explain it is that neuroses or mental illness is the distance between the ego and the soul. What the ego says is the goal and the function of life, and what the soul is asking of us. And that our symptoms are these messengers trying to speak to us and tell us that there's something going on that's not working. Somewhere our soul is not being fed. And then secondly, and this goes to parents and to partners, the second task in shadow work is, what am I asking of the other that I ought to be doing myself? And to take back those projections. Nobody can live my life for me. And I can't abdicate my sense of self to my children and to my partner. As I've said to you other times, I am not responsible for making my wife happy. That's her job. And she's not responsible for making me happy. That's my job. My children aren't responsible for making me happy. That's my job. And ultimately, as they grow, right, we are more responsible for them as they are small. But as they grow and emerge into adulthood, we again are not responsible for making them happy. That is their job. It is their life. They can't live it. We can't live it for them. And they can't live ours for us. But this is, in fact, what we are doing. We are ignoring, excuse me, we are ignoring the call of our own soul, of our deepest and wisest self. We're living out lives of quiet desperation, if you will. Lives that we were supposed to live, that we should do. And then we come upon midlife, or we come upon having a child that struggles, or our marriage and the situation at home becomes untenable in some way. And we're invited to look deeper, to look farther, to confront what we've been avoiding. both in ourselves and in relationships. I shared this quote the other day with several people. My therapist said to me last Friday. I was going about my session, my own session as a client, and toward the end of the session, as I finished up a lot of the topics that were pressing for me, I got to, I said, well, me and Michelle, we've had a rough week, but fact of the matter is, everything that I need to talk about is just my own stuff. I need to take better care of myself. I'm not doing that. I'm short with her. She's short with me. So I don't really have any questions. And Jamie Gill, my therapist, just smiled and she said, that's the thing about psychotherapy is that the news just gets worse and worse. And we both laughed. I thought it was hilarious. I shared that with other people, even my family, and they're like, I don't like that quote because it sounds so negative, but it wasn't. It was joyful. Because one of the greatest gifts that I have been given in this life is the realization that I'm the reason for my own unhappiness. And that along with that, I'm also the solution to my unhappiness. And that's what set me free. Shadow work can be in therapy, going and talking to somebody, getting past the level of discomfort. If you're getting bored in therapy, talk about it with your therapist. If your therapist isn't giving you what you think you need, tell them that. If you have an adequate therapist, they'll be exhilarated that therapy has arrived at that point. That's the golden moment in therapy when the client becomes dissatisfied with the therapeutic process. And the magical moment is, will the therapist respond like the parents did? Defending themselves, explaining themselves, making the child, or in this case, the client, think that something's wrong with them? Or, as happens with healthy attachment and good psychotherapy, will the therapist say, thank you for telling me. It must have been risky for you to tell me that. I'm so honored that you would trust me with that. And I'm sorry. Keep talking so I can understand what you need, and we'll see if I can't provide it for you going forward. And if it happens again or it happens in a different way, please tell me that again. Because the adequate therapist or the adequate parent doesn't have an ego in that moment, right? Since they've given up the idea, they've killed the ego sufficiently, at least in that moment, to not have the need to be good. They could just be a person, a human being. And the client learns, I learn in my therapy, that's the goal, is to become a human being. And as one Native American elder mentioned when asked, isn't everybody already a human being? His answer was, most people never get there. And that's what the Barbie movie is about. That's what all these movies are about. It's about becoming who you are, becoming yourself. You can do it in group work. Group work is really dynamic. It's one of the reasons why we do our intensives in group settings, is because you learn as much by watching other people do their work and work through their issues and their dilemmas. You see yourself in them. Body work. Some people do better attending to the body, doing somatic work. Mindfulness can be a wonderful vehicle to see and discover these parts of ourselves that are unconscious. Uh, Paying attention to myth and story and fairy tale. I like movies as a way to understand and talk about it. There's some great movies that have come out recently that talk about this idea. Psychedelics can shift our neurology so that we get a glimpse of the transcendent, a glimpse of what it means to be whole, a glimpse that we are okay in our broken, imperfect human condition. We are okay, and that glimpse can become contagious, can spread. And with good psychedelic integrative therapy, we can build on that more and more. We can do it through our dreams, through our art or other people's art, poetry and music. The wonderful thing about artists is that they have, to some degree, and the quality of the art will be a direct reflection. They have transcended the rules. Picasso broke the rules. Van Gogh broke the rules. The Beatles broke the rules. The rap artists broke the rules, and so forth and so on. These rebels decided that the status quo and what everybody was saying the right way to be was unacceptable boundaries, and so they went outside of it. They have access to the collective unconscious, to their own unconscious. The collective unconscious is kind of the way that the world works, right? The themes that are present in life in the world that get repeated generation after generation, culture after culture. Those are the collective unconscious. That's the collective unconscious stuff. And they have great access. They might not even know what they're saying, but because they've diffused, they've broken through the barrier between conscious and unconscious, they can just do it. That's what's meant with the funny little saying that goes, right drunk, edit sober. Because the drunk person has no boundaries, right? Just right drunk. I think it was Miles Davis who said, if you make a mistake, do it again and again. Do it 3 times. If you read the book by Rick Rubin, a very popular right now individual who helps artists develop their art, it's all about this. Art, poetry, and music, and mostly get married, get in relationship, have children. Those will be the biggest teachers. Those will be the biggest levers, if you will, that will uncover the undone work that you have yet to do. Carl Jung posed this question. He said, we all have a shadow, or does our shadow have us? Has it taken over? Have we begun to identify with the dark side so much, right? Carl Jung turned it into a question when he asked, how do you find a lion that has swallowed you? If you become an angry, bitter, resentful, cruel, compulsive, addictive, mentally ill person, if you will, if you've crossed the threshold between neurosis and actual mental health, mental illness, if you've crossed that threshold, the shadow most likely has you. You lose your agency. It becomes repetitious and habitual. You'll notice that I use the quotes from the account Sophia Cycles. I would recommend that if you want to learn more about this kind of depth psychology, this kind of spiritual psychology that looks at treating the soul, reclaiming the soul. And remember, soul is in Greek is psyche. That's what it's talked about. It's where the root of psychology comes from. And yet we've gotten so far away from soul work. And yet it's in the name itself, psychotherapy. Sophia Cycles is a wonderful account on all the major social media accounts that shares quote after quote, lesson after lesson, a very, very rich source of material. And she shared this. This is from Robin Robertson. Until the shadow is integrated into the personality, the world appears filled with opponents or with adversaries who are actually products of the unconscious. Afterward, people can be seen as individuals and even people that disagree with us. We turn the world into us and them, right? Self and other becomes exaggerated. And we pin all of our projections of all the parts of us that we haven't dealt with onto the other person. We dehumanize them. We turn them into something that they're not. Adashanti, the spiritual teacher, said this: anything you avoid in life will come back over and over again until you're willing to face it, to look deeply into its nature. That's why at Evoke, whether it's couples therapy, couples intensives, individual intensives, or the parenting work that we do, we're trying to make a deeper change, a transformation, so that it's just not introducing you to skills that can be still used in the service of the old way of thinking, because nothing will change. I've thought about this a lot today in preparing for tonight. And I want to say this. I know that my teaching is fairly heady. It's become really philosophical, really obtuse, really spiritual, really abstract over the years. I know that. I know there are therapists out there that will spend hours teaching you the I feel statement, communication skills, or specific tools and skills that you can use in your various relationships and situations. I know that. And if that serves you better, great. Great for you, great for them. There's a place for that. I think the reason I start at this very abstract and spiritual and complex place that I typically speak from or speak about is because I've tried all of those things. And eventually the contradiction gets exposed. I give somebody an I feel statement, they use it, and the kid doesn't change or the partner doesn't change. I teach somebody how to reflective listen, and nothing changes except for that they've listened. And when I say nothing changes, the child doesn't change, the partner, the marriage doesn't change. It's because the thing that needs its attention isn't being addressed by those skills. Because the spiritual dilemma for most of us is that we have a hard time operating in a world where we can't control it. We say we want intimacy, but do we? Or do we want to remain in control? Remain in a position where we can protect ourselves? We say we want to raise children to become all that they can become, but do we? Because that's messy. That's painful. There are detours. It's inconvenient. It's inefficient. It's exhausting. It's like the great graffiti artist talked about, Banksy, when he said parents will do almost anything for their children except for allow them to be who they are. And of course, it's not lost on us that that comes from an artist who his very medium is a rebellion against society, graffiti art. Freud said it, I think, really poetically. He's a wonderful writer. He said, a thing which has not been understood inevitably reappears. Like an unlaid ghost, it cannot rest until the mystery has been resolved and the spell broken. I remember years ago, I wrote about this in the book. I was at church, and a gentleman was sharing a dream that he had. His son apparently was struggling with addictions. And in the course of trying to help his son over the course of what I remember to be years, he shared this dream where his son was in the middle of a pond, a small body of water, and he was drowning and asking for help. But as the father considered wading into the pond, it was filled with sewage. It was dirty and disgusting. And so the father stayed at the edge of the pond and didn't swim out to the son because he surmised that if he got into the pond, he himself would become infected by the pollution in the pond and he would be killed. I didn't offer this interpretation because it was at church and he wasn't my client, but I saw it quite differently. I saw the dirty pond, and it follows with a lot of good dream interpretation, as a representation of the father's undone work. The things that he was taught would kill him, would poison him, would not in fact kill him or poison him. But because he believed that, he couldn't make the connection to his son. I'm clear about this over and over and over again. The individuals who come to this work and embark on this journey that I'm describing week after week, podcast after podcast for 16 years, 1,600 or so of these episodes I've done. The folks who answer that call and wade into those waters that they have been taught by their culture, by the media, by their family would kill them, don't in fact die, but find everything that they're looking for. Find all the joy that they're seeking. And they find it inside of themselves. And therefore, they aren't dependent upon their spouse to give it to them, or even more tragically, they aren't dependent upon the child to give it to them. They have it inside of them and they carry it. And because they have that energy, that love, that expansion, they become a better partner. They become a better parent. They help the people around them. They support them in their journeys more capably. That's what I mean at the end of every episode, which I'll say again tonight. Thank you for showing up and listening to these, watching these. It makes all the difference in the world to the people that you love and the people that love you. It makes a difference. This is the work. And I can't, in good conscience anymore, and haven't been able to for years, give you a formula that will make you in control of the universe, which essentially means your child or your partner. I can't do that. I can present you with ideas and my presence, just like has been done for me, so that you can be more with yourself, more of who you are, more capable of connection, more capable of intimacy, which comes with ambiguity and uncertainty and distress and pain and sadness and hurt and fear and anger and frustration and grief. And that's what the call is. That's what this work is about. Jung said it this way: one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. The latter procedure, however, is disagreeable and therefore not popular. And Adyashanti said, enlightenment is a destructive process. Enlightenment is a destructive process. It has nothing to do with becoming better or being happier. Enlightenment is the crumbling away of untruth. It's recognizing that the answers that you were given to most of life's important questions, and it's not their fault. We're not picking on them. We're not blaming forever remaining victims to our histories at all. Just the opposite. We're confronting it. We're dealing with it. We're killing the parts of it that don't make sense anymore. That's what enlightenment is. I wrote this morning, shared it on social media. We unconsciously shape our children so that they show us the parts of ourselves that are in need of healing. Children will inevitably expose the emotional immaturity of their parents. This is just what they do. They just do it really well. They have access to our buttons in ways that other people don't. They have a handle on our self-esteem the way that other people just don't. Children will inevitably expose the emotional immaturity of their parents. While this is a painful, exhausting experience, the outcome is expansion and a deeper form of love, and this is its gift. I share this, and people that have been through this process for years say, yes. People that have never been through it think it's psychobabble. They think it's outdated. They think it's nonsense. And that children just need a good lesson and good boundaries, and everything will be just fine. We recognize the shadow in the stories, the myths that we read. Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde is a famous one. It's not about a monster. It's about the two sides of us. We recognize the shadow in the excesses in our lives, the addictions, the perversions. We recognize our shadow in the projections onto other people. As Carl Jung said, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to a better understanding of ourselves. That was my statement in therapy on Friday. That was the statement that triggered my therapist to say, that's the bad news. That's the thing about psychotherapy, is the bad news just keeps coming. We recognize our shadow because our relationships stumble, because they are showing us that something is broken inside of us. That is its reflection. That is its lesson. We recognize the shadow in an impulsive or inadvertent acts, Freudian slips, if you will. Sometimes we recognize the shadow with the feedback that we get. Negative feedback from others who serve as our teachers. This is the third time that you arrive late without calling me, somebody says. We recognize it in our shame, our exaggerated anger about other people's faults. Boy, he really let his weight get out of control. We recognize it when the shadow takes over in compulsions, addictions, identifications, exaggerated behaviors, or impulsiveness. We recognize it in our dramatic denials and in reactiveness to others. That old saying, if it's hysterical, it's historical. It's historical. Carl Jung famously said, I would rather be whole than good. What did he mean by that? What does it mean when a teacher says, I would rather be whole than good? It means that if you are only good, you can't own up to the bad. You can't own up to your humanity. Every disagreement is everybody else's fault. Every mistake is somebody else's misinterpretation. I love the quote from The Godfather that says, keep your friends close and your enemies even closer. I don't think of that as other people. I think of that as we have our gifts, we have our talents, but we also have our wounds. And by the way, they are bedfellows. My greatest gifts are right next to my greatest wounds. And so are yours. We have in our Wilderness program, we have a war story assignment where the child is supposed to write a story about a wonderful experience that was negative and unacceptable. Even the reason he was sent here, but he or she or they are only allowed to write from the perspective of how wonderful and amazing it was. And I watch them write this, and so many of them can't write it without apologizing or without qualifying. I know it wasn't happy. I know the drug didn't really help me. I know that the self-harm didn't solve anything. We ask them to take all those pieces out. I'll show you the words of higher enlightenment in just a moment. We ask people to experiment with themselves. You as a parent have the right to experiment. Try it out. See what works. See, I love the advice from the prophets and the gurus. Do what feels best. The reason that people stop using drugs is the same reason they start, to feel better. The reason that a spouse starts to communicate their deep feelings is the same reason that they stopped, because it feels better. It's the context or the cage sometimes that needs to be addressed. We have to learn to quiet the crowd. If we don't develop this sense of ourselves, and again, I prefer it in the context of a therapeutic relationship myself. That's my medium as a person. If we don't experience the development of the self, if we don't take responsibility for our own individuation, we abdicate the responsibility of our lives to other people. We float along the breeze of other people's opinions of us. In therapy, this has led me to be less directive. Years ago, there was a big movement in the treatment field about the 7 challenges. It was posed as a alternative to the 12 steps, although it needn't be. And the 7 challenges was just a way of not fighting with people's defenses, telling people what was right and wrong about them, but understanding them. Right? Understanding what the defense is trying to say. What's the unmet need? Where's the wound? I used to give this out. This was a poster. This Words of a Higher Enlightenment poster was a poster that sat on the wall of my therapist's office for many years. It was something I found out later that she created and drew herself. The words that are listed here, it's just a list of words with a nice piece of art in the middle. Drop out, fail, quit, lose, relax, give in, flunk, let go, empty, surrender, wait, give over, mellow out, slow down, don't forget, submit, fade away, relinquish, withdraw, flop. I won't read them all. Give up, forego, resign. These are all words that we would associate with failure, with badness, with lethargy or laziness or a lack of character. But enlightenment is learning to see that you have parts of this in you. We all do. Some bigger, some not. Jung said, by not being aware of having a shadow, you declare a part of your personality to be non-existent. Then it enters the kingdom of the non-existent, which swells up and takes on enormous proportions. If you get rid of qualities you don't like by denying them, you will become more and more unaware of what you are. You declare yourself more and more non-existent, and your devils will grow fatter and fatter. The Buddhist teacher, the Buddhist monk, a model of peace and love and nonviolence, who passed away a couple of years ago, one of my heroes, Thich Nhat Hanh, wrote this. He said, continue practicing until you see yourself in the most cruel and inhumane political leader, in the most devastatingly tortured prisoner, in the wealthiest man, and in the child starving, all skin and bones. Practice until you recognize your presence in everyone else on the bus, in the subway, in the concentration camp, working in the fields, in a leaf, in a caterpillar, in a dewdrop, in a ray of sunshine. Meditate until you see yourself as a speck of dust in the most distant galaxy. Now, if that's not pie in the sky, I don't know what is. But that's what this work leads to. It leads to more compassion, more love, more connection, more peace, more serenity, more confidence. I love the way that Charles Bukowski says it. Don't fight your demons. Your demons are here to teach you lessons. Sit down with your demons and have a drink and a chat and learn their names and talk about the burns on their fingers and the scratches on their ankles. Some of them are very nice. You come to your therapy session with a symptom because you yelled at your child or you cheated on your spouse. That's quite a range I just shared. You, instead of anger and rage, you heal that by understanding it. It's like the great teacher said, I'm not here to teach you. I'm here to love you, and love will be your teacher. Love is the only thing that can drive out darkness, right? Darkness can't drive out hate, can't drive out hate. Only love can do that. But we're terrified of that. We have been taught to be terrified of grace and love because the world will go more and more out of control. I'll wrap up with a handful of quotes. Like I said, knowing your own darkness is the best method for dealing with the darkness of others. These are all from Carl Jung. I would rather be whole than good. There's no coming to consciousness without pain. Your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. He who looks outside dreams. He who looks inside awakens. And another couple of quotes, one from Gandhi. The only devils in this world are those running around in your own hearts, and that is where all of our battles should be fought. And the author, the writer, George R.R. Martin said, once you have accepted your flaws, no one can use them against you. I know I speak in such poetic, grand ways. I know that. But I think that's eventually where all of this work goes. That's why I wrote at the book of The Audacity to Be You. These are the conclusions from my own experience, my own journey, my own therapy that I've arrived at. The 3 keys, the 3 doorways to enlightenment are these. Number 1, be okay with being wrong. Be okay with it. Just think about that. Think if your partner was okay with being wrong. Think about what a relief that would be. Think about the energy that could be saved for you and for them. Get good at losing. Number 2, come to know your own darkness and remain on speaking terms with your mental illness. Work on yourself. Your marriage is in trouble, work on yourself. You're having a child who's struggling, work on yourself. Anything else is delusional, in essence. Number 3, learn how to die again and again. And what I mean by that is old contexts. In AA, they say you have to find a new playground and new playmates. Old contexts, old ideas, old circumstances, situations, and sometimes old people. And I'll end with this very last thing from The Journey of the Heroic Parent. And I borrowed this from the cartoon Savage Chickens. This is the 3 stages of self-awareness, the 3 stages of enlightenment. Stage number 1 is your friend says to you, you're an idiot. And you respond, no, I'm not. Stage number 2, your friend says to you, you're an idiot. And you respond, yes, I am. And then stage number 3, you just say you're an idiot. I'm an idiot. A way to liberate yourself as a parent or a partner is to tell the other person, okay, I'm an idiot. Now, what do you want to talk about? Where does the discussion go from here? That is somebody who has integrated their disowned shadow parts. That's somebody that's come to terms with their humanness. That's somebody who's become who they are and is at peace with it. And they spend their time more capably loving other people than any of us can imagine. All right, folks. Thanks for letting me go a little bit over. I hope that makes sense. Any leftover questions you might have, send them into webinar@evoketherapy.com. If you've given any to my moderator this evening, all those questions will be answered in the next broadcast. My 2 books, The Journey of the Heroic Parent and The Audacity to Be You, are available on Amazon and Audible. If you want to do a deep dive in your own work and do some shadow work, a great opportunity is the Finding You Intensive. February 21st through 25th is that next offering. My daughter Emma's running it. I'm a huge fan. If you know of Emma or you've heard of Emma, take advantage of that offering. I think there's a spot left. We have an online offering March 8th through 10th. Even a new therapist just attended the last online offering and said, I can't believe how powerful it was online. It's half the time. It's a third of the cost. And if time and resources are at a premium for you, the online option could be a good option. Like I mentioned earlier, returning to you is March 6th through 10th. And then the Finding Connection workshop is full for now. If you want to get on a waiting list, you can. But my wife and I are going to be running that in about a week. And I'm looking so forward to that. We have custom programs for couples and co-parents and families. Contact Intensives at Evoke Therapy to find out more. We have support groups for alumni wilderness and current wilderness families, February 1st at 7 p.m. is that next offering, 7 p.m. Mountain Time. Once a month, we have an alumni-only meeting, February 19th at 6 p.m. Mountain Time is that offering. And then for our intensives and coaching clients and alumni, February 12th, 6 p.m. Mountain Time is your next online support group. Contact supportgroups@evoketherapy.com for more information. If you want a coach who can help you do this work, these are our therapists and coaches who know this work, who know this attachment-based work, this depth psychology work. They've been introduced to it. You can contact in coaching@evoketherapy.com to get assigned one of our more than 40 coaches can be matched up to help you with whatever you're dealing with. We ask all current parents to try at least 6 12-step support groups. We encourage you, ask you, plead with you to just try them out. And combination of Al-Anon.org, CODA.org, FamiliesAnonymous.org, or AdultChildren.org. Also, RefugeRecovery.org is a Buddhist-inspired recovery program, less of an emphasis on a higher power. And then the National Alliance on Mental Illness, NAMI.org, has free classes and resources in your local community. All of these broadcasts are available on your podcast app, wherever you consume podcasts, or Spotify. Just search Finding You an Evoke Therapy podcast. You can also go to soundcloud.com on your computer and listen there. You can go to Evoke's YouTube channel, listen and subscribe there. And the rebroadcast of the video versions of these are broadcast usually by the next day. You can find Evoke Therapy programs and me, Dr. Brad Reedy, on X, Threads, and Instagram using the handles @EvokeTherapy and @Dr. Brad Reedy, respectively. Also, Evoke Intensives is on Instagram using the handle @EvokeTherapy Intensives. On Facebook, you can find us by searching Evoke Therapy Programs or Evoke Therapy Intensives. And of course, our blog has wonderful content each week. All right, folks, I don't have another one this week. I will be broadcasting next Tuesday, February 6th at 6 p.m. Mountain Time. I'll be talking about Al-Anon and other 12-step work. So if you wondered how that fits into what we talk about here tonight or what we do in our programs, I'm really excited to share. I think it's a great template for the kind of spiritual work that we're talking about tonight. Thank you for joining me. I hope this is a helpful point of contact. I hope it means something to you. And as always, for and on behalf of the people that you love and the people that love you, thanks for showing up and being willing to do your work. Have a great evening, and I'll talk to you next week. Bye-bye.